Hey everybody, welcome to Trading Capital's live stream. Today's live stream, we're going to be discussing and looking at some of the insider trading, buying and selling starting from February 1st. So we're just looking to see if we can notice any unusual patterns. We're going to look at the share counts, the sizes that they bought versus how much they sold. So I look for unusual activity, and how I define unusual activity is typically anywhere between a 20 to 25% change in the amount of shares held after the transaction. So again, I look for patterns that distinguish someone either selling a large chunk of their shares, roughly 20 to 25% or higher, or buying more than 20 to 25% of the current share base that we had. And then I look to see if there's any potential technical chart setups through multi different time frames, the daily, the weekly, and the monthly. I am a firm believer that often insider activity can be used to yield and make profits both on the long and the short side by analyzing charts correctly on a technical basis and using some of these fundamental drivers from key knowledgeable people to try to identify some of these strengths or weaknesses in companies. So this is marketbeat.com. We're just looking at insider trades from February 1st here. And as I just pull up my little screen here, just give me one. All right, so we're ready to start scrolling through this. Actually, let me back out of here, and then we'll go back in. And I'm just going to change the date again, February 1st. All right, so we're just looking again for unusual. So here we have the buy and sell side, obviously, that's pretty clear. We have the shares either bought or sold, and then basically the total transaction, and then the shares held after transaction. So the two big categories that I look at are the shares held after transactions. That's kind of my biggest thing that I look for, and then the amount of shares either bought or sold. So I'm going to just quickly scroll through here, and I'm sure you'll be able to keep up. But again, for instance, just starting off this example, 2,600 shares sold. They still have 2,700 shares, 27,000 shares. That's just less than, what about 1 or 2% of their current share base. So that's nothing unusual in my opinion. Looking through Google, saw some selling, nothing unusual, 660 shares. That's very small, minuscule. Looking at this, so this one's interesting. They sold 3,000. Dennis Melroy, the CFO of ANAB. I actually haven't heard of that. It's a biotech company, it seems. Sold most of his shares, 3,065 shares sold, 964 shares still held after transactions. So again, I don't know this company. It might not even be one that I trade. I have to look at the volume. So I mean, this is one that I wouldn't even trade. The volume's super during the weekly, but this is not one I'm trading. So I'm just going to actually skip along with it. I'm sure there's other ones we'll find. ANGI, sold 12,000. That could be somewhat of an interesting chart. Let's just pull it up, ANGI, because that is more than 20% of the shares sold. It's more like 30%. This chart on the daily chart, first things first is I'm just going to point in that we do have this potential little supply zone coming up. This is your big resistance, this area over here, call it from this 258 to your 266 pivot. If you do break out of that, I mean, this chart actually looks bullish at this point in time. One level I think you want to stay above if you're a bull is this trend line. If you stay above this trend line, this chart could likely push higher. But if you break this trend line, and based off of some of the selling here by an insider, the CTO, that sold roughly over 30% of his shares or her shares, it's only 28,000, so it's not crazy. It's still a small trade, but it is something that you keep your eye on. Not one that I would trade, personally speaking. I wouldn't touch this little chart because doesn't fit my criteria. So let's just keep moving along. Whoops, the Oxford. That one, that's nothing important. 555,000 versus 4.4 million. That's no touch. No unusual pattern. 600 versus 38,000. Nope. This Cimpress, Sean Edward, the CFO of Cimpress, sold 6,959 shares, totaling just over 600,000. That might be interesting because he currently holds no more shares. So let's look at the CMPR. CMPR, interesting. Just had a big technical breakout. And when did he sell? That insider sold on February 1st. So February 1st, we had the insider offload basically all of his shares off of this pop-up. So that's kind of interesting. This one, again, super light volume, so it's not one that I would trade, but definitely interesting to see dispersing of all of the shares after it's had a really, really big move into this resistance trend line here. You can see it's above that one, but that's everyone's mistake in TAs. They like to use the initial trend line there. So let's see this trend line here. If we connect using this pivot, you can see it's actually had a weekly technical breakout here on the chart, but maybe that gets kiboshed and it's short-lived. We'll have to keep an eye on that one, but not a stock that I would trade. Let's just keep scrolling through here. Cleveland Cliffs buy side. Whoa, this is unusual, and this is one we will trade. So buy, the director Ron A. Bloom bought 25,000 shares. Shares held after transaction 27,200. So that's a big buy in comparison to the amount of shares held after transaction. So let's look at CLF because this one trades absolutely enough volume. It's a big market cap. Daily chart of CLF. I'm just looking at the weekly and monthly chart on my other screens as well. Just bear with me here. Daily chart looks poised. That's a nice breakout off of a earnings miss. So a nice breakout off of an earnings miss, and now you're just consolidating in a tight daily range. Weekly chart and monthly chart look actually very bullish. I'm looking at you're above all of the weekly moving averages. The monthly moving average, the 200 monthly moving average is sitting at 26.94. I think that's where it wants to go. That's its next resistance. Basically, you can see here on the daily chart, we're just putting in this wedge pattern. This is a nice little wedge pattern. And how we can calculate that is you have this head and shoulders pattern here to the neckline. So if you break to the downside of the wedge, you could see roughly a move down to 519. But the opposite is true. If you break to the high side of the wedge, we could see a really big stellar move all the way up to 31. So those are kind of your two upside targets. And based off of this technical chart being above all the daily key moving averages, being above the weekly key moving averages, if you get a breakout out of this wedge pattern and it's supported by a big unusual insider buy activity, that chart's looking poised to go higher. So Cleveland Cliffs is steel stock looking poised to go higher here, and it has some fundamental buying of some insider activity. So perhaps insiders know maybe there's a buyout, maybe it certainly could be a buyout. I mean, what's the market cap on Cleveland Cliffs? It's trading 10.27 billion. So that pay close attention to Cleveland Cliffs. That one could be a potential long target off of a nice bullish pattern here. It's consolidating now right underneath resistance. So the bulls want to see this chart pattern chop sideways for at least another week or two, and then it could blast through this resistance level. All right, so Cleveland Cliffs, keep that one on radar. I'll mark it down here on my notes. Cloudflare, 10,000 shares sold, 1.4 million. That's nothing. COLB, that's nothing. That's really not important. DRI. You know, this one could be important. The SVP, Senior Vice President of Darden Restaurants, selling 6,800 shares, still holding 19,000, but that's roughly a quarter, just over a quarter of the shares sold. So let's pull up the chart because that does fit the criteria. More than 20% shares sold. Wait, make sure it is a sell. DRI, yes, it is a sell. Okay, so DRI trades just under, I mean, it's a little thin, but you could get away with trading it. 990,000 average volume. This chart does not look bad, but the resistance trend line that I have drawn here, and I've actually obviously done some work previously on this chart, it's going back to your COVID low here. A little bit of a negative divergence on the RSI, but you are coming up into your first level of resistance. I just want to see this monthly chart. Really, it's not a trade that I would touch at this point, but just be cautious if you're a bull in this name. You are seeing a negative divergence on the RSI, and you are seeing some insider activity. I think the big level bulls want to pay attention to is this trend line. You can see we've tagged it a couple times now, and you haven't been able to get above it. And this is with the indices charging to new all-time highs. So pay close attention. Remember, stocks that are at resistance and S&P is breaking out to new all-time highs and overbought itself, you have to start questioning, okay, maybe they are going to stay at resistance and actually trend lower if the S&P gets a small pullback. All right, let's move along. That one, again, no real touch on that one. I would kind of leave that one alone, just keep it on the back burner. COLB, that's nothing crazy, no unusual activity there. DCOM, no unusual activity. Dash, no unusual activity. Let's keep throwing. Dropbox, no. Edward Life Sciences. Okay, Edward Life Sciences here. The CFO sold 72.55, totaling just over $500,000. Shares held after transaction 19,000. So that's more than 25% of the shares sold. So let's pull up EW, Edward Life Sciences. So EW, whoa, look at that. Huge breakout on Edward Life Sciences. And this is ahead of earnings. So they likely gave an early guide. They likely gave an early positive guide. And the actual CFO has taken huge advantage of that and selling on February 1st, basically over 25% of the shares that he holds. So when I start seeing that makes me suspicious. You have a huge pop right before earnings. The CFO sells right in this pop, the day before the CFO sells, and you get this big pop. That's kind of interesting. Now, just be careful. This is a strong chart. I'm just looking at some other time frames here. It is a strong chart. So right now the big resistance level you're at and you've tagged is the monthly 50 moving average. The monthly 50 moving average is sitting roughly at 88.01, and you're just slightly under that. I think if we look at the weekly chart here, the resistance trend line that we're hitting is, if you take it from this pivot to this pivot, you can see we're coming up into that area now. If you get a break above there, you'll have resistance at this pivot, and then you'll have resistance at this pivot. But the CFO is selling a great deal of shares, so just watch this one. I don't think it's a short in this area. Maybe it's a day trade scalp short, especially if the market is weak tomorrow. You are into some decent resistance. But if we were to push a little bit higher, then this might be a good opportunity to try to scalp on the short side. I mean, look at the monthly resistance that we're approaching. There's some pretty hard, heavy bar downs that broke down here that we are approaching. So pay close attention to that. Throwing that 50. You can see the 50 sitting at 88.01. Maybe we want to tag that in the coming sessions, but that's a big resistance area. All right, let's move along here. So Edward Life Sciences, keep an eye out because there was a sell side pressure from the CFO. Eli Lilly, 78,000 shares. They still have 99 million. That's not unusual. That's just some profit taking. That's a nice profit, over about 51 mil. Let's keep moving along. So far, really, there's only two that I would potentially trade are CLF, so Cleveland Cliffs, and the EW, Edward Life Sciences, those two. We're just seeing if we're going to find any more unusual activity. FVC Bancorp, 29,000 shares sold. So that's about 40-45% of the shares sold from the director, FVCB. FVCB. Just give me a minute with this chart. I just want to look at some of these larger term time frames. So FVCB. So that transaction activity was on the 30th. Was on January 30th. Wow, isn't that just dandy, eh? The CFO sells somewhere in this bar here on the 30th and completely misses this downside breakdown candle. But what this tells me is this likely wants to see some more downside. Again, you have a stock having a potential technical breakdown on the daily chart. Weekly chart looks pretty horrific itself. Take a look at that technical breakdown. That's not good. And you have it backed up by the CFO. I would keep this on watch. I'd keep this one on watch. This one could be a potential failed bank. You never know. Now, it's not one that I would encourage shorting. Why? Because it's only 208 market cap and the volume is about 17,000 or 22,000 shares every 20 days. That's minuscule. That's light. So this one could overshoot. So I'm just going to scratch this one. But this stock is likely in trouble. And this is kind of maybe telling us that there's a lot more issues in the regional and small banking sectors. All right, let's keep moving on here. GitLab here. We have Robin Schulman, an insider, selling 15,000 shares. So it's about 25%. So let's pull up the GTLB chart because that does fit the unusual criteria. Or GLTB maybe? No, GTLB. Is that not what I typed? There it is. GTLB. Oh yeah, I actually did some work previously. So there was some selling that took place actually last week from the two massive insiders, CEO and chief legal officer. And then we actually just got more selling on the 30th from an insider, dispersing roughly 25%. So something here is unusual. Maybe they're selling ahead of earnings. And remember, the stock market has been at all-time highs. So some stocks trade very, very strongly and highly correlated to the market. So just because the stock is trying to break out of a basing formation doesn't mean it has to. You have a lot of insiders selling here at this range. Last week I have it marked on the chart that is sold, and then we have some more selling on the 30th. So pay close attention to this name because it is looking bullish technically, but bearish through some insider sales. Very interesting. That one's a tough one to play because, again, technically it looks like it wants to go higher, but it's concerning when you have some insiders, multiple insiders selling at these levels, specifically when it's a big percentage of their holdings. All right, let's move along. KB Homes seeing some selling, HBAN, but it's not really too unusual. I mean, KB Homes is actually the CAO, Chief Accounting Officer, selling almost 50%, just about 45%. So let's look at KBH as the ticker, KB Home. So home builder stocks have actually been resilient, potentially losing some of the short-term moving averages now. Just want to look at some other time frames to see the resistance. Oh yeah, this monthly chart's not looking pretty on KB Homes. Oh, sorry, it's the wrong ticker I was looking at. Jeez, I was looking at HBH, KBH. Okay, that's better. I was wondering. I'm like, that does not look like what I'm looking like on the daily. So KBH, well into the stratosphere, pretty much at all-time highs. What appears to be a potential bull flag here. And the insider sold on what date? Insider sold on the 30th as well. So if we look at the 30th, that was basically right around this candle here. We've actually proceeded lower. So I always like to see whenever with that insider transaction too, is if it's on the sell side, I like to see, okay, has a few days have passed, are we currently below that or above that level? Because if we're below and it's a sell side pressure, it just makes it more likely that it trends lower. Now, if this was above, then it may negate that insider selling and it could push higher. But this is looking a little bit weak. Maybe you get one more little pop here if the market remains resilient and strong. But some insiders selling here. You're potentially getting some bearish crossovers on the moving averages. If I look at the weekly chart, just want to see the resistance. Actually, we got to go to the monthly chart. I'll show you the monthly chart. From this pivot to that high pivot, take a look at 1, 2, 3 pivot tops. You're intersecting right through that madness. So as long as you stay underneath this trend line, you could short these highs. But this one is looking vulnerable to going lower, specifically if there is insider activity as well, starting to unload unusual volume positions, KBH. So keep KBH. That also could affect some of the other home builders, like Pulte Homes, and so on and so forth. All right, Liberty Energy, that's not unusual. Berkshire, not unusual. Huge sells, but not really equivalent to what they are still holding. That's not bad. Meta, little insider selling. Getting some more MSTR, Michael Saylor. So that probably looks like a stock option or grant because I do think he still has shares available. So that was probably a little stock option. Or let's keep scrolling along here. 71,000. Okay, OLN, Olin. I'm not really too familiar with that ticker, but the vice president sold 71,800, totaling 3.7 million, and only holding 19,020. So she sold the majority of her shares, only holds 20,000. So let's pull up this OLN. Oh, and you can actually see there's quite a few several sellers here from OLN. The VP, Scott Whoa, the CEO also selling a huge stake, 539,000, still holding 47. Massive sell. CFO also selling, huge stake, still holding 137, but big sells. All right, I'm interested to see this chart. Let's see. OLN. All right, OLN. I'm just going to pull it up on my other time frames. So OLN on the daily chart is hitting some support here. So the insiders have really sold. If I go back on the 30th and the 31st, there's been some block orders. So really from this red bar down to here, insiders have been pushing it down in a great deal. You can see it actually got a good pop off of earnings, and insiders are selling into that buying pressure. Why is that? That's kind of concerning. That's very concerning in my opinion. And what I'm seeing here is a potential rolling over in the trend. The monthly chart is not looking the greatest. Daily chart's definitely looking better. You know, one could argue that if this holds, the support over here, the EMA 113, one could suggest that there might be a potential inverted head and shoulders on the daily forming. Now, you'd only entertain this pattern if you got a break of this neckline here. You can even see that it attempted a breakout here off of this neckline. And this could be a failed breakout, actually. Maybe that's what's causing. Maybe the insider activity selling and this being a technical failed breakout is one that we can short. Very interesting. You know, so I think your next neckline that you have to watch is this is your original neckline, which tried breaking out on high volume, failed. If you get back above there, then you'll have another resistance neckline just slightly above it. So watch this chart. I'm not looking, the daily looks better than the monthly. The weekly looks so-so, still underneath the 100 and the 50 weekly moving average, but holding above the weekly EMA 113. But again, that's some nasty selling from some insiders. Maybe they know something. I think the big level to watch too is if we lose this pivot here, this little pivot zone, call it 40, call it $50 just to make it interesting, or even whole number. If we lose $50, I think we can actually push all the way back down to 42.08. So basically we lose this pivot at 50, and I think we push down to about 42.08. So that's roughly a 15% drop from this daily support here. So I'm going to wait for that. If we get a daily close above this one actually we could short. It has enough volume, trades over 1 million shares a day. The market cap is a little light, 6.29 billion, so it's slightly small. And what's interesting, this is a process industry, industrial specialties. So, I mean, you've even seen like the likes of DuPont, DD, also getting hit pretty hard. You know, this one's into really, really good support. This one gave a week forward guidance ahead of their earnings. I think this one could actually pop higher. Maybe they have one more dip on earnings, but if this DuPont dips on earnings, I will be scooping it up with both hands. Scooping it. You know, you're at this longer term wedge pattern. You still have a potential inverted head and shoulders with a new shoulder potentially developing here. So we'll watch that closely. But again, interesting to see that OLN. All right, let's keep scrolling through here. Optin, that's not really that important. Picard, 4,800 shares sold, 5,700. Okay, so that's about just under 50% of the shares sold. So let's look up Picard, PCAR, because that's an unusual volume trade by an insider. And the date of that Picard was on February 1st. So if we look at Picard, that February 1st transaction really happened here, and price action has gone higher. Picard's in the producer manufacturing trucks construction farm. Average volume is around 1.67 million. Market cap is 53.4 billion. So super, super liquid. So looking at Picard, it's trending higher here. 3 weeks of consecutive upside in a row. This is now its 4th month of consecutive upside in a row. But this stock has just gone absolutely parabolic. Weekly RSI potential divergence occurring. You're overbought on the weekly. It's trading with a 74.39 RSI. On the monthly, even on the monthly RSI chart, Picard is overbought. Extremely overbought on the monthly. So you have a monthly of 74. You have a weekly of 74.39. And you have a daily. And all time frames are starting to put in that bearish divergence, except for the monthly. The monthly is actually still trying to push higher. But the weekly and daily trend are seeing some potential weakening here and trend change. Now that was a big, big sell at these highs. If you can get above this pivot, it looks like you can have a continuation move higher. But if you can't get above this pivot, then we should have another dip back down to about, what is this area, $95, give or take a few pennies. So I'm not really going to short that one unless we get a potential lower high, or if I see an absolute mega parabolic divergence occur intraday where we see a pop, then we look to fade the pop and we can write it down. All right, let's keep scrolling through here. The insider trading, OPTN, we discussed that. OSIS, that's nothing crazy. We discussed Peloton, Karen Boone, the director, selling 50,000 shares, still holding 35,000. So that's a big sell. Majority of the shares were dispersed on February 1st. So let's look at Peloton. I do think this one had a negative reaction on earnings. I don't think it was really that good. Yeah, look at this chart. This is filthy. Filthy, 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 filthy. Peloton's in trouble. Peloton's not only seeing insider selling, which occurred on what, February 1st? Peloton, yep, February 1st. So insider selling occurred on February 1st, so somewhere in this candle, and then we actually got more selling on Friday with the indices screaming to new all-time highs, at least the S&P 500, and this still couldn't catch a bid. And this actually is now breaking on the daily chart these massive support zones. You did get a weekly close under support as well. So it's not a good sign for Peloton. I think if we look for a bearish pattern, if we form now a potential bear flag, I think we can look for a potential short down, a continuation move down, if we get a bearish pattern. If you start retracing, your first resistance is going to be up here, this red bar high. That's a big, big resistance level. I don't think you're going to get through that unless the indices remain strong and unless there's some sort of fundamental catalyst that pushes Peloton up. All right, let's continue to scroll along, see if there's anything else. So Peloton looks like a short. Peloton does look like a short, backed up by some insider selling. Michael J. Relling, that's about 33% of the shares sold. It's kind of a small amount, 51,000, but let's take a look. PLXS. All right, PLXS, daily chart, not looking the greatest. Let me just do a quick volume. Volume is super, super light, so not one that I would trade. It's an electronic technology company, so remember, NASDAQ has been screaming higher, tech's been screaming higher. This one's lagging. If you're comfortable shorting names with low volume, it has a 2.68 billion market cap, so it can be shorted. I'm sure it can be shorted. You did get this little bearish cross of the 50 and the EMA 113 on the daily chart. Monthly chart, you have put in a lower high. The big level you need to watch on the monthly chart, if you break this trend line here, connecting these pivots, then this stock is an all-out short. I think if we get a daily close below this trend line, that's a short. Even right now, I think the risk to reward is positive. If you were to even short it here, I would personally stop out of the trade if we closed back on the daily chart above the EMA 113 in orange. That would be my stop loss. Because look how we got above it here, check back, pushed above it again, made a higher high, retested, bounce, and then started selling off, closed below it, retested the EMA 113, got rejected, and now we're doing a little bit of a retest again. That would be my stop loss in terms of covering the trade if it was pushing higher. Very, very tight stop loss. But this one is not looking healthy, in my opinion. I do think that the insider selling might also lead to more selling. All right, let's keep scrolling along. I'll mark that one on. RBB, that's not unusual. CRM, 15, that's not unusual. IoT, that's not unusual. 20, 40, 60, 80. Perhaps SLB, Schlumberger. Some people call it Schlumberger, but I say Schlumberger. Schlumberger, 20,000 shares sold, roughly just under $1 million by an insider. You know, let's look at the chart because that's still a decent chunk. I mean, they're still holding 77,000 shares, so that's certainly, you know, not that negative. There's still a decent chunk there, but 70, that's still a decent chunk of sell. 20,000 shares, 70,000 still held. SLB. So you're into a big level of support here. Massive support both on the weekly chart. You're hitting the weekly 100 moving average, the EMA 113. You're below the short-term weekly moving averages. On the monthly chart, you're hitting the 20 monthly moving average. That's actually really solid support. That's a big support level on the monthly chart. You are putting in higher highs, higher lows. The only cautious thing is look at the steep ascent of these higher highs. So high, higher high, higher high, higher high, higher high. And then your higher high that you just put in here was not as convincing as these previous ones. So again, you're almost seeing that, okay, you're having a nice, strong move, and then you're waning. So is this rolling over, or is this just a simple consolidation pullback? Time will tell. But again, this is not an easy short. The insider activity is showing sell side pressure, but this is not an easy short at this level. I would personally feel much better to short this if this actually got a pop back up to this $56 to create a right shoulder. That's personally what I would look for in this trade. But I mean, you have broken this little trend as well. I just noticed that from your pivot here to your pivot. So you bounced here, got above it, rejected, above it, and now gapping below it again. So this one could be an interesting short. I'm certainly going to keep it on my short watch list. All right, let's keep scrolling along here. So Schlumberger was the last ticker. SecureWorks, that's nothing important. That's not unusual. 7,000, that's not unusual. 21,000 sold, that's not unusual. 511 versus 56. 52,000 by the EVP of Coke. So that's roughly just over 1/3, about 35, 37%. Okay, so let's look at Coke, KO. So she sold on the 30th. Basically in this green candle there, okay. I mean, Coke's a hard one. Coke is a hard one because even if you do go into recession, Coke is one that could still stay elevated in a recession. And what I'm just observing here is you have triggered this little inverted head and shoulders. You've checked back here, got a retest. Even if you were to draw the neckline here now, you're still above that area. So I'll pay close attention to, if you want to give this trade a little bit of legs on the long side, it is looking poised to continue higher. You know, that insider activity, this one could be an example where they're well off and there's just profit taking or some sort of financial commitment that they need this sell side money for, because this chart, technically speaking, looks very strong to at least push up to about 63, 64 bucks, kind of in line with this high pivot zone, so 63.30. So look for a move into this zone. And basically that suggests if you get a confluence of this high pivot and this trend line going all the way back to your COVID lows, your pivot to your pivot zone over here, you could see a potential move in Coke all the way up to that area by the middle of the month, February 15th. If we get that confluence retest, but this chart's looking like a beautiful long trade setup in my opinion. All right, let's keep moving through. So Coke looks interesting on the long side. All right, LSX, MK, that's nothing unusual, nothing there, nothing there, nothing there, nothing there, nothing there. 7,000, that's some selling in Zscaler, but it's not an unusual amount. Because I mean, you still have the majority of your shares. So really that's going to sum up the insider activity both in the buy and sell pressure from that last February 1st window. So there's a few names we looked at, the likes of Edward Life Sciences, EW, that is a potential trade setup. You looked at GTLB, which is seeing some consecutive weeks of insider selling. KB Homes, potentially on watch for a short with insider selling. What else did we have? I know there was something else. Oh, Cleveland Cliffs, CLF. So steel stocks looks poised for a continuation move higher off of insider buying. But really that's going to sum things up here. I am going to call this video to an end because we have gone through most of the trades here and unusual volume activity. And Peloton looks like a short, a continuation short. That one's having a massive technical breakdown. Let's just quickly now scroll through to see if there's any headlines. We'll discuss the Powell reaction. Sorry, we'll go on CNBC actually. So Powell did have his 60-minute press conference. It was only 13 minutes. Powell insists the Fed will move carefully on rate cuts with probably fewer than the market expects. So that's kind of in line with what technically I think the rates are kind of trying to do at the moment in the futures. They are trying to break out of a little inverted head and shoulders pattern, a bullish reversal pattern. Now the problem is these senators and government individuals, they're just printing and running a huge deficit. Another 118 billion bipartisan aid proposal for Israel-Ukraine border security. And what's interesting, I mean, a lot of these people think that 118 billion just goes to Israel, just goes to Ukraine, but the thing about it is that's the security, the border security, and the proposal. A lot of the times it's US just giving this money to US based companies like defense companies, and they build the weapons that supply, soldiers in Israel, soldiers in Ukraine. So a lot of the times US companies even still benefit, and US economy still benefits from all these aid packages, even though it's not called a direct stimulation tactic for the US economy. A lot of the times the majority of the funds do go. Let's see what else Powell said. So these are the key points. Federal Reserve Chair Powell vowed a 60-minute interview aired on Sunday that the central bank will proceed carefully with interest rate cuts this year. We just want some more confidence before we take that very important step, beginning to cut interest rates. Powell warned that monetary policy tightening would cause some pain. However, it really hasn't happened. The meeting concluded with the committee holding its benchmark borrowing rate in the range of 5.2 to 5.5%. In its post-meeting statement, the committee said it would not be cutting until it has gained greater confidence that inflation is moving to the 2% target. Interesting. This was the big number that spooked and spiked the yields. Let's go over some of the economic data that we're also expecting. I'm just going to go to investing.com. Let's just go to the economic calendar. So Sunday here, you have a little bit of Hong Kong data, nothing crazy there. Let's go over, let's keep scrolling to see what North American data is. So there is the S&P Global Services PMI. coming out at 945. That could influence the dollar and yields. The ISM non-manufacturing, ISM PMIs, non-manufacturing PMIs. So these are two big data sets here, guys. We'll see if they've come in hotter, which would force yields higher. Cooler could cause yields to cool off. 6-month and 3-month bill auction, that's kind of important for the yield market. That's the RBA. Let's look at Tuesday, just scrolling through here. Building permits in Canada, I pay attention to that. Some government talk. So Tuesday's pretty quiet. There's a 3-year note auction. That's actually going to be influential for the short-term yields. I think that should actually be a 3-star. Not because it's a 3-year, but because the yield, the short end of the curve is very important right now. Very sensitive to what we're trying to see unfold. So I think that 1 o'clock time frame on the 3-year, pay close attention to what the 2-year note does. All right, let's move along to Wednesday. A little bit of mortgage data in the mornings, exports, imports, yada, yada, yada. Crude oil inventories on Wednesday at 10:30. Gasoline, etc., etc. 10-year note auction on Wednesday. That's going to be big. That's big. That's going to be market moving. And then you also have the Atlanta Fed GDP at 11:30. So I find that interesting. If they revise the GDP up again and push it higher, that makes it likely that the 10-year note is not going to catch a bid. The 10-year bond is not going to catch a bid, and it could press yields higher. So I'll be very curious to see how this GDP number comes in for the US. And if it's revised up again, which I honestly don't believe, then we could see yields push higher. Even if it stays the same or comes in lower, there's still a chance that yields stay elevated because inflation is a little bit stickier, especially if the long end of the curve starts to price that in. Some Fed member talk. Thursday, let's continue. Initial job loss claims at 8:30. So pay close attention to that. Fed's balance sheet reduction. I still like to look at that because that is on a slow and steady decline. Oh, that's the GDP now calculator. So let's just look at the Fed's balance sheet. So you can see the balance sheet here basically going from a high all the way in roughly, 2023? March of 2022, sorry. March of 2022, we almost hit 9 billion. This was your banking discount window where banks started to fail. You went from 8.3 all the way up to about 8.7. And now you've fallen sharply lower all the way to about 6.3. So typically, this does have a high correlation to the S&P 500. But at this moment, the government is just insulating things quite substantially. But the Fed is still tightening, and I still think the Fed weighs in on economic policy over the long term, more so than what a government can do in the short term. All right, let's continue through here. More Canadian data, participation rate, Baker Hughes oil count, CFTCs. Okay, so I mean, it's not that crazy of a week. You do have some employment data that we'll watch. You do have the Fed balance sheet that I'll watch later, and then some of the yield auctions. But really, that for the data is going to be it. You know, the 2-year, the 3-year, the 30-year, and the 6-month bonds are going to be important to pay attention to, specifically around the fact that the market will be closed once this some of these important data sets come out. I'm just scrolling through here just to see if there's anything else I want to touch base on. SYM will tank. I haven't looked at SYM. Let's take a look at SYM. Usually this is just a insider activity report. Is there insider selling in SYM? Have you noticed anything, Nareesh? SYM. Let's take a quick peek. Hey, Casey, I'll take a look at all you guys' tickers. I'm just finishing up this video, but I look at ARCB. I'll take a look at ARCB. Just give me a second here. Let me just pull up I'll look at SYM first. SYM will tank. This one's looking pretty strong on the daily chart. You're actually getting a weekly. Oh, that's the wrong ticker. SYM. Symbotic. So trades, the volume did increase there. Trades about 1.28 million, so that's pretty decent. I mean, this chart, what makes you think it's going to tank, Nareesh? This chart looks pretty decent, in my opinion. It does look pretty decent. And I'll look at yours, Casey, in a minute. But SYM, not a bad chart in my opinion. You know, there's a potential there that you could be putting in this head and shoulders, but again, you haven't really triggered that yet, in my opinion, Nareesh. So this chart still needs to give us a little bit more. Really, the only thing that I see on SYM, it's in a no-touch spot for me. I wouldn't short it. I wouldn't buy it long. If I were to pick a side at this point, based off of this volume breakout and where it's trading, I would say it still goes up. But really, the short range is up here. And you're just in a wedge. You're in a big, giant wedge pattern. So it hasn't made a definitive breakout move yet. All right, Casey, let's take a look at your ticker. Just give me a second. ARCB. ARCB. And if there's any other tickers in the chat that you want me to look at, feel free to post them now. Let me just quickly take a look at all my other screens here. So yeah, I mean, this is a technical breakout on the daily chart, the weekly and the monthly. So I mean, you've had a breakout on all time frames here. This is a strong chart. ARK Best Corporation, roughly trading. I mean, the volume is a little light. This is a thin stock, only 420,000 shares traded on the breakout candle. Average volume is 182,000. So I mean, it's not that. It's very thin. That's what I'm saying. It's very thin. 3 billion market cap is okay, but the volume is a little concerning. It's not one that I like to be able to get my money in and out within like 10 seconds. And this one might cause, if you were to hit a buy or sell order, especially if you held a relatively large position in this company, even 10,000, 20,000 in this company could cause your order to be sold in, over the span of a few minutes instead of instantly. So it's not liquid. But I mean, it is strong. This one looks very, very strong there, Casey. I think you're on track to see this push higher. Keep in mind that if the market breaks down, leading stocks also could break down. But this one on a technical basis does look very strong. Beautiful rounding base. Rejection once. Pullback. Push again. Rejection twice. Pullback. Higher low. Now you're pushing above off of another higher low, and you actually got a positive weekly close and a positive monthly close. So that's a clear technical breakout on ARCB. Now, how high could this go? Well, if you just take your low end of this, call it consolidation, move it to your neckline, this stock could push all the way back up to about 160. Now, again, this is just a measured move off of a light volume name. So typically light volume names could squeeze higher and overshoot. They often do overshoot. So, I mean, 160 is a target, but that's not equating to really like squeeze or overshoots to the upside. And then I think the line in the sand, if you're bullish, where your stop loss kind of has to be, is basically a daily close back below this trend line. So, I mean, even entering the trade right now, you still could potentially be risking 10% on the loss side if you just chased it long here. Still a 3-to-1 risk ratio, but it's still a potential risk here investing. I would like to see it retrace one more time back to, say, the support zone so that you get a little bit more of the reward side. It narrows your risk reward just a little bit more. But pay close attention to that because that is a solid ticker. Nice find there, Casey. I wish it just had a little bit more volume. So I mean, we've covered a lot of things. We covered the economic data. We covered the insider buying activity. To sum things up, I'm just gonna close the video here. It is now 10:30 at night where I am. We are seeing the futures down across the board. We're seeing the dollar up. We're seeing yields up, crypto down. So we'll see if that starts to spill into the market session tomorrow. I think it's going to be pretty important to see the SPX close back above this high pivot. If for some reason the SPX closes back underneath, what is this high pivot candle on the SPX? So the high of that candle is 49.31. So if we close back below 49.31, I think that is a very, very bearish close. So I'm just going to mark in the exact location, 49.31.07. A close below this white trend line tomorrow is super bearish, which would imply roughly a 0.58% drop in the S&P, about a 0.5% drop. That's certainly not out of the realm of possibilities. All right, any final questions in the chats? I am going to close this video up. I'll give it another minute if anyone has any other tickers, but if not, we touch base on quite a few different opportunities, both on the long and the short side, through looking at unusual insider activity. I think some of the top things that we watch out for are names like CLF. That one looks bullish. And a few other names. But other than that, I think I'm going to end this video here. Thank you all for tuning in. And it's going to be a wild, wild market, guys. Just be ready for anything as we progress into the week. Again, for the bulls, I think you've had a fantastic, fantastic run. If you haven't taken profits on your longs, you're probably being greedy. And typically those that are greedy don't end up turning out to be a good situation. I think the market is due for a small correction. And I do think that's coming very, very quickly. Just doing some final checks here, and I'm not really seeing anything else. So, all right, guys, thank you all for tuning into the live stream. Definitely check out my tradingcapital.ca website if you're interested in how I'm trading and navigating this market. I do think we're at a crucial potential turning point. I think this could be the turn this week, considering we have most of the mega caps. Really, the final one is NVIDIA, which has just been in a absolute parabolic state. But we'll have to see how that report shapes up. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you on the charts a little bit later. Thanks, Kristen. Cheers. Thanks, Narish. Thanks, Casey.